all, thank you for coming on and having this conversation. I really appreciate it. I'm sure lots of people that are watching and listening to this right now are going to appreciate it as well because if they're not familiar with what you do, you're an author of several books. I've listened to, I say listen to, like audiobooks especially. You narrate many of them. Actually, I think all of them. Is that correct?
All of them, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I love the audiobook, and I'm caught up to speed up until the latest, the current one. I think I have 5 hours left on that one, so I'm pretty up to speed on all the other ones. But if anyone's not familiar with your work and some of your the content and the books you produce, would you mind just sort of reviewing that for anyone that's not up to speed?
Well, I'm a channel. I'm a conscious channel. So the books that are in print, and there's 8 of them now, the ninth is coming out in August, are all the transcripts of channeling sessions. The last several books were all done in front of live audiences. So, I sit in a chair, I close my eyes, I hear, I repeat what I hear, and then the recordings of those sessions are transcribed, and that becomes the book, or the books, as it were. So that's my job. I'm not really the author. I'm a collaborator in that I'm present for the session. I'm channeling and I'm being used. My vocabulary is being used, but I don't claim authorship of the books.
And if someone's not familiar with what channeling is, can you describe that? Let's say for someone that's never even heard of it before.
Well, I mean, if you want to think of me as a radio, that's how I describe myself. So I'm a radio. We're all radios, my guides say. And we're all sort of tuned in or playing different stations. So when I'm channeling, I'm just tuning the radio that I am to play a broadcast that's present that comes through me. So it's a form of clairaudience. People know clairvoyance, which is clear seeing. There's also clairsentience, clear feeling. And then there's what I do, which is clairaudience, which is clear hearing or telepathic hearing, if you prefer. I don't really understand it. I didn't ask to do this. I don't quite understand how it works, and I possibly never will. But I do know that what I do is I sit in a chair, I close my eyes, I imagine myself climbing into the back seat of a car and turning the wheel over to the guides that I work with. And then I'll hear one phrase repeated incessantly. And then the moment I give that one phrase voice, everything else comes out on top of it. So all of the books are actually unedited. They're the unedited transcripts of all the sessions. So if you can imagine closing your eyes and speaking 8 books aloud, that's kind of the phenomena here. Um, people talk about channeling in different ways. Some people are really speaking about inspiration. I channel my idea. And, inspired ideas are high. The difference with channeling is it's just sort of not my word, not my teaching. I'm really just the conduit for it.
And you have to get yourself any sort of a meditative state or anything like that for it to go through, or do you have to have any preparation, or does it just come naturally at a certain point?
It's well, I mean, yeah, it's really no different than turning a radio dial. So you can be listening to one station and you go click, and then there's a whole other station that can be played. So, what I'm doing is I'm moving my consciousness aside or moving it to the back, allowing it to recede and allowing this thing to come forward. I have friends that, have wonderful, preparation that they do before they work. That's not how I work, and I find it odd. I mean, my job is to show up for this work often when I don't want to, and very often I don't want to, and I've dictated chunks of books and lectures before many, many people, like, on the worst day of the year, right after putting my dog to sleep, I had a channel and kaboom. So the transmission doesn't seem to be impacted by me, by what's going on with me. It's operating independent. So if you think of the radio, I mean, the radio is not the broadcast. It's the vehicle for the broadcast, and that's my job.
And I know we spoke about this before in the previous discussion we had almost a year back now on a previous episode. If anyone wants to listen to that or watch that, it'll be in the description of this episode. I know you touched on this, but how did you initially get into this? Was it something that sort of spontaneously started happening for you, or was it something that sort of gradually happened over time?
Well, it's both, really. I was raised sort of an atheist. I didn't have a spiritual life. I didn't know really why one would want one. But when I was 25, I hit a real wall and I began to look for something more. And I found myself on a spiritual path. I mean, I started praying for the first time in my life, and then I heard a voice telling me to get my act together. And I actually listened to it. And I started opening up psychically shortly thereafter. I started seeing little lights around people. I'd had an experience with energy that people later said sounded like a spontaneous Kundalini awakening. I don't know what it was. I just might have been hyperventilating, but all this energy sort of pushing up from my base out through the top of my head. When I was trying to teach myself to meditate, that's when that happened. But I ended up studying a form of energy healing. And I was volunteering at a center that was providing services for people with life-challenging illness. It was the height of the AIDS epidemic in New York. I was maybe 30, 31 or something at that point. And I found that when I had my hands on people's bodies, I began to hear things for them. It was that simple. If I had my hands on your chest and I heard the name Alice, I learned to say, "Who's Alice?" And you'd say, "My mother, my girlfriend, my dog, whatever." And, with that would come a large release of energy. And so as I kept getting confirmation for what I was hearing, I began to trust it more. And I started doing a little group that met in my apartment. And I wanted to do the group to do energy work. And in fact, wanting to do the work of my teacher at the time. And the very first session, I started hearing things for the group. So I began channeling in that group. And that group met for about 18 years, in my living room in New York City. Sometimes there were 3 or 4 people, sometimes 20. I certainly wasn't looking to make a name for myself doing this. I was teaching at NYU for 25 years during all of this, and I had another life that I was fond of and protective of, so I didn't want to be known as a channeler. But as I continued to do it, I began to develop. And when I was 48, so that's a long time into this, I quit smoking after many years of being a heavy smoker. And the moment I did that, everything shifted in my whole system. And the guides I work with started to lecture through me. And once they started to lecture through me, and once I became willing to record it and transcribe it, which I really didn't want to do, but I was told by another medium, "You need to do this." They delivered a whole book, the first of what is now, 9 books. And that was unexpected. I didn't plan on that. I was working, I was trying to be a playwright still in those days, and I was let go of a writing project, and I just went to bed, which is what one does when one, gets fired from something. And a friend of mine called me and said, "Paul, this might be a good time to write that memoir about how you became clairaudient." And I said, "Well, I don't really want to do anything." And the guides piped in and said, "Well, we have a book to write, and if you take 2 weeks, we'll do it." And at that moment, my ego had just been leveled, quashed. I didn't really care what people thought. And I suddenly had time on my hands that I wasn't expecting, so I agreed. And the guides delivered the first book, which was called I Am the Word, over the course of 2.5 weeks. And I think it would have been 2 weeks, except I took 2 days off to go teach at NYU. And that was the book. And there was no editing. And the guide said it'll be the first publisher, don't haggle. And it was never even submitted. The first publisher who read the book, he picked it up at a conference at the Esalen Institute where I had been invited to channel before, a group of scientists and scholars. And he published it. And then that was that. So they just keep coming, truthfully. I'm kind of rolling my eyes some days because it's pretty much about a book a year now. And I just agreed to do 3 more, which I expect may be the last trilogy. That would be 4. But the guides clearly have a lot to say. And as long as I'm willing to sit there in the chair and take the dictation, they seem to be happy to teach. And people seem to be benefiting from what they have to say.
And that information seems to come through you quite naturally. I mean, that's how you're getting so much done. So many books done in such a short time frame. It's pretty ridiculous, actually.
Well, if you think about what it takes to really write a book, I mean, that's work. I'm sitting in a chair reciting something that I'm hearing, and then I don't have to go back and edit it. In any book, there's about 3 words changed, and that's because I mispronounced them, or I was speaking so fast at times that I overstepped a word. there was a word in the last book that came out called alchemy that I refused to speak because I didn't think it was a real word. And the guides were using this word, and they said, it's in the book, they said, you know, we're saying a word, Paul's refusing to repeat it. And I mean, they had some humor about it. And as soon as the channeling was over, this was at the Esalen Institute, there were like 50 people in the room. And I said, the word is penumbra. And I didn't know what penumbra meant. Everybody got their phones out and looked up penumbra, and it was the light that shines from behind a cloud. It was the perfect word to describe what they were talking about, but it wasn't a word I knew. So I didn't give it voice. But, you know, for the most part, that's it. As it comes out of my mouth is what's on the page, for better and for worse, including, you know, occasional tense disagreements and things like that. But it's a script. It's a verbal dictation that's transcribed. It's not like crafting a book where you get to go back and fix everything that you don't like. That would be much different and I think much harder.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying, I think your series of books is amazing. And I've started listening to, I believe it's called The Book of Ra, or Ra, and then it's Law of One. And that is a channeled, very, very similar format, very similar fashion. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but I've been enjoying that as well. And been going back to Jane Roberts. She had written a book called The Seth Book, or Seth Material, something to that extent. And I enjoyed that. And it seems that material tends to I'm drawn to it. I'm fascinated by it. I'm really, you know, interested in the whole process of it. For the reason you describe is that it goes out naturally and there's not really much editing involved. You would see with a typical book. You've been doing this now for quite some time, actually, and the next book is coming out in August of 2021. Is that correct? And what's the premise around that book? Like just the basic summary of the content of it.
You know, the funny thing is I haven't read it. I dictated it. It was all done on Maui, which is where I'm living now. And, you know, I was on a deadline. I'd agreed to this, and I had done all of my groups traveling, you know, in front of audiences. And here I had to convene a group, you know, virtually, because I can't channel if there's not an active listener or a group of people. You know, the guides are teaching and they need a student or a listener. So that book was channeled probably over the course of a couple of months, maybe 2.5. You know, every time I did a group or could convene this special group that I had assembled to be the audience for the teaching. And then I gave the tapes to the transcriptionist, and I didn't read them this time. I just, you know, I was so overloaded between, you know, being so displaced in my life and all of the channeling. So I just I got the book, the manuscript from the publisher in my email box yesterday, and I'm like, okay, wow. Really read it and see what I think. But my recollection of what that book is, they call it The Kingdom. And it's really about aligning to a level of consciousness. The guides call the kingdom, you know, what's their definition? It's like the realization of the divine in all things. You know, God is all things. You know, and they're teaching us how to maintain a level of consciousness where we can align to that, where we're operating really from our knowing, which is our true state of consciousness. And, you know, and we're manifesting from that place, which is rather different than I think how people like to conjure, you know, from this level of agreement that we share. So the guides say, you know, they're taking us to an octave above the one that we're used to. They don't talk about dimensions. They talk about octaves of music. They say everything is in tone and in vibration. And so the kingdom is the octave above the one that we have known. And the realization of self there, they say, is embodiment as the true self, the authentic self, not the self that, you know, sort of self-identifies through a narrative of pain or cultural appropriation and all of those things. I don't know if you can hear this. I'm in the rainforest and now it's raining. It's really quite something, but I think we'll keep power.
So this sense of knowing, I mean, why do you think it is that a lot of people operate from this sense of knowing, or even you could say sense of being in a way? I mean, I personally have difficulty myself with sometimes it's always when I come out of like a meditation or like a tank
Mhm.
session or something like that, great. And then after a few days, it sort of dissipates after I start checking so many emails and I start checking my phone and all this stuff sort of, comes in. And then all of a sudden I lose that sense of knowing. I sort of step away from it. I mean, especially now with everything going on, I mean, what's your take on how people are not in this knowing?
Well, I don't think that we understand that that's something that we have capacity for. I mean, the guides I work with say you can't make yourself know. You can't force knowing, but you can align to it, and you're aligning to the aspect of self who does know, which they say is the true self. And that's actually called clear cognizance or clear knowing. So when I read for people, for example, and that's how what I do, I have a practice now as a psychic, and they call me a medium for the living. So I tune into people, and you might say, I'm estranged from my sister, and you give me your sister's name, and I can sort of step in energetically to your sister and hear her. And I just know there's no way. I've never met your sister. I don't know what she looks like. I might start to resemble her and, talk about her frustration with your relationship. You understand that? So the knowing is actually bypassing thinking. And the guides say when you think you don't know, and when you know you're not thinking. And the guides have also said that when one is in one's knowing, one is never afraid. And that's one of the indications that it's the true self. And, the example might be, even if you get like bad news, like a bad medical diagnosis or something, that's not what's scary. There's no fear there. The fear is what happens next. Is it going to hurt? Am I going to live? All those things. So, knowing they say happens in the present moment. And my suspicion is you're coming out of meditation, you're quite present, and you're not sort of operating, in your ideas of what should be and past and future. And that's what's giving you that ability.
Yeah, when I come out of a meditation, for instance, I mean, specifically, I've been doing these float tank sessions every Sunday, and when I come out of those, it's like I don't all I really I'm just so grateful for being alive and having life and being able to have any experience, like whatever it may be, like breathing. It's like I'm so grateful for every little thing. And then that just I feel like that is that sense of knowing and that is that same place that like it's filled with gratitude and love and it's so comfortable with just being anywhere in the universe at all. It's just I'm not. There's no like, thought of anything. It's just this crazy feeling. So it is like it slowly slips away as I start to get through my work week. I'm sure a lot of people feel that way. Um, what is your thoughts on everything that's happening now? I mean, in 2020 and then into 2021 with the whole COVID thing, with everything that's going on, almost feels
I mean,
like.
the guides have spoken about it, and I don't remember what they said, and I'd have to go into channel now. And my opinion's just my opinion, and
Mhm,
that's not what my work is about. I think it's all potentially to be seen as great opportunity.
mhm,
The guides have been talking about this stuff for years. In the last 3 or 4 books, they talked about how humanity was about to encounter radical change, including radical change of political and economic and religious systems. And, everything that we thought would be there always is suddenly going to be up for discussion, and this becomes an opportunity. They said, and this was in the Book of Truth, which was dictated right before, I guess, the election where Trump was elected in the U.S. as president. They said, what you're about to go into is a period where everything is going to be sort of exposed or dug up, and none of it's pretty. And this is internally as well. The guides often say you can't, if you have a body buried in the basement, eventually it's going to stink up the whole house. And that they said, imagine that your backyard is under excavation and things that were buried 2 weeks ago are coming up and 5,000 years ago as well. And it's going to look like a mess. And they said, the reason for this isn't so you can point fingers and say, oh, how terrible and how wrong and blame. It's because everything that's been buried needs to be seen and brought to the light in order to be transformed. We can't heal anything. that we're attempting to suppress or hide. I mean, that's what people call, I guess, spiritual bypassing. And so, all of these things can be seen as great opportunities for change, but change is rarely comfortable. So, I think we're in the throes of it. I don't think we're seeing the end of it. You know, COVID, I'm a New Yorker. I lived in New York my entire life, and I was in Costa Rica doing a workshop when New York City shut down, and I was unable to go home, and I had actually just rented an apartment that I was supposed to move into the next week. And I ended up, a friend of mine found me a little tiny house to stay in, on Maui, and I had no place to go, and I came, and I actually found a life here, which astonished me, which was far better for me than I think the one that I was living. And now I've moved here for real. I never spent a night in that apartment in New York, my dream apartment. I never spent a night there. It's so funny. I was happier in my little tiny house.
Mhm.
So for me, it was a fascinating experience of being thrown out of certainty, and I was fortunate I could be able to work through this. Many people weren't, and were challenged in other ways. But, I was moved out of my comfort zone in every level. And it's what I needed, I suspect, to go to another level of understanding of how my life might be lived.
And I think that sort of summarizes the way a lot of people might feel, that that's sort of what was needed. I mean, I've spoken with some people that I've asked like my thoughts on all that's sort of transpiring, and I feel happening as it is, as it should be. And, as uncomfortable as it may be, I think it's going to lead to this greater evolution, of how people do things, of how people interact. Um,
Right.
of veils being lifted in a lot of ways as well, too. Because as you said, your was it the stinky dead body in the basement? It's
Yeah. Yeah.
revealed in a lot of ways.
Well, I think the stuff that isn't working gets revealed.
Yeah.
I read for people, I have a practice, and, I can't tell you how many people who've been living lives of sort of certainty, are suddenly questioning their life choices and why they're living the way they're living. And in some ways, we only do that when things fail. When I started having the beginnings of an awakening. I don't say that I'm awake, but when I was 25, I was a year out of grad school at Yale. I was getting produced in New York and London, and I had, getting my picture in Interview magazine, which was like the hot place to be in the day, with my platinum blonde Billy Idol hair. And I was getting everything that I thought I was supposed to get and want. And I was a train wreck, and I was deeply unhappy, although I didn't know it. And, my life got shifted. I ended up on a totally different path than one I ever would have thought I would have chosen. I mean, when I look at my life today, it still makes no sense. It's easier for me to say I'm a college teacher than to say I'm a channel, although I'm established in this work. But, Jane Roberts, who you mentioned, was a poet. And the woman who channeled A Course in Miracles was an academic. And most of us are doing something. This is not what I thought I'd be doing. I didn't even necessarily believe in it. I understand it because it happens. There's a quote attributed to Helen Schucman, who channeled Course in Miracles. And I believe she said, "I don't believe it, but I know it's true." And that feels really right to me. So, occasionally life just throws us a curveball, and I think we all got a big one, and a bunch of them actually. And I think we're all still reeling from this, but perhaps, perhaps more will be revealed, and perhaps
hmm
be good to come. That's my hope.
hmm when you just said that, she doesn't believe it, but knows it to be true. It almost feels like belief comes from the mind and knowing comes from the heart. I suppose it knowing just feels more grounded, I guess you could say. I mean, the two come together in union, but
Yeah.
it seems like belief really is coming from the mind. It almost feels like it's being analyzed a bit too much, being thought through too much, rather than being felt out, if you know what I mean. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
it does make sense. This is what I think. I mean, when I know something, when I am in my knowing, there is never a question. So if you try this for a minute, just close your eyes
Mm.
and think of a time in your life when you knew something. I knew I was in love. I knew the relationship was over. I knew I got the job. I knew this wasn't for me. Just anything. I remember what that felt like to know. And now go to thinking, I think I know what I'm having for dinner tomorrow night. I think I know how long I'm going to live.
Oh, it's scattered. It's scattered as hell. All
Yeah.
over the place.
Yeah, because well, when you're thinking, there's always a question attached. When you
Uh,
know, when you're knowing, there's not. You simply know, and you
mhm,
can say that's the heart. I think that probably is quite accurate, but it's not sort of based in all of the sort of mechanisms and logic of history. Of how we piece our lives together through a narrative of history. The guides say that I work with say that the small self, which is really just a personality structure, there's nothing wrong with it, we all have it, but knows itself through history. And the true self doesn't. The true self is actually beyond linear time, beyond gender, beyond all those things, the eternal self. That's who you're tapping into. You can call it the soul. I think it's probably something a bit other than that, but that's a way for some people to understand it. But I believe that the true self or the divine self is the aspect of the creator that seeks to realize itself as and through us at the cost of all the bullshit of who we think we are, which is or should be based on, the fashion of the moment.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, and I find that this sort of the self, like it accumulates itself, you said, through experience, through history. It almost happens even through, your parents and your upbringing. I mean, it all comes together. And now we have social media accounts and these profiles with these descriptions, and we have our social selves, whatever you want to call it. So it really does seem like a false self in a way, because when I've had meditative sessions where I've almost left that self, the physical body, I I almost see this body from that perspective as like a vessel, or like a container, and it's almost like a complete detachment in a way from this body. Um, Not like it doesn't care for it. I mean, it appreciates it. It loves it. It seems to love everything. But um, we this body and this self, such a pedestal. We completely like forget that other self exists in the background at all times.
Mhm.
Um, how do you feel people can connect more with that self in the awareness, let's call it, that's always present?
I mean, I don't know that I could channel on your show today. I mean, I just like I had clients all day. I'm a little shocked. Because what I think is what I think. And I would just say ask to know, ask to be taught. I think those questions get answered. My guides might say something different. I'm going to tune in. I'm just going to say this. If I do tune into the guides, I whisper the words and repeat them. So it sounds like what it is, but the idea of who you are. The guys are saying the idea of who you are, the small self must be known as an aspect of who you are, as an aspect of who you are, but not the entirety, when you can broach that idea. When you can broach that idea, there is more to me than who I think I am. There is more to me than who I think I am. You can begin to address the aspects of. You can begin to address the aspect of self who knows, who realizes, who realize the kingdom and who can claim the kingdom. The kingdom, as we say, is the source, is the realization of source God, if you wish, in all manifestation, in all manifestation. The small self cannot do this. The small self cannot do this. It's threatening to him or her. It's threatening to him or her. She wants to run the show. She wants to run the show. She can't imagine him would run it better. She can't imagine that anybody would run it better. When you understand that the who that you are, when you understand that the who that you are, be it the true self, be it the true self or small self is the director, is the direct, you will understand that you can move. You will understand that you can move to a new way of being, to a new way of being, to align to the true self. To align to the true self is a choice, You have free will. You have free will if you wish to utilize the will in this way. If you wish to utilize the will in this way, you will be met by God. You will be met by God or the divine or whatever you wish to call it, or the divine or whatever you wish to call it in the perfect ways required for your growth, in the perfect ways required for your growth. You don't have to hammer the door down. You don't have to hammer the door down. You have to say welcome. You have to say welcome and allow it in, period. the same period.
Mm-hmm. It seems like transition would happen almost immediately. Like I'm not sure it's letting that guard down and letting that self come through. I mean that's what it feels like for me anyways. But it's weird that the guard is always up so frequently and so often, and that becomes a natural thing. To not rest and just it's almost like rest and relax and take it easy and allow yourself to be greeted with God, or to God, I guess you could say. Interesting. I want to ask you something, and maybe the guys would have an opinion of this, but I had a thought after coming out of my last float session, and it was that I should learn and know all the names or aspects of God because I don't quite know them too much. And then my wife, and so that would be like Yahweh or um, I'm trying to think of, you could say Jesus or Buddha or anything like that too, but or Elohim. But my wife afterwards, she said, well, wouldn't that just be then to know all the names or aspects of yourself, to then know yourself? She almost, and I took when she was saying it to me as, oh, is that what a message that I had coming out of the meditation? And is it the mind that was just trying to know all these names and all this stuff? But at the end of the day, it's just to know the self and all the aspects of self in that way. Does that make any sense whatsoever?
I mean, I think potentially, I'm not quite tracking it. I think there are many ways that people identify source or different aspects of source. I'm sitting in front of a statue right now of Hanuman with 5 different faces, and I don't even
Mm-hmm.
understand, what this fully means. But there are different aspects of the divine that can be realized and known. So, I honestly don't know that God or whatever God is cares what we call it. I
Mm-hmm.
can't be that small. But I think that there are different aspects of the divine that can be honored and can be aligned to. Again, radio stations that can be aligned to and played that can bring us benefit. So, I was raised an atheist. I was raised to believe that stupid people believed in God or a higher power. And when I was really, I mean, it's one of these classic sort of textbook conversion stories. I was in a hotel room in St. Paul. I was 25 years old. I didn't know where to find drugs in St. Paul. The Gideons leave Bibles in drawers in hotels like that. And I hoped that it said prayer for people in crisis. And I didn't know what the crisis was. As far as everybody thought things were going well for me. But, I said it and I actually meant it. And I didn't know what I was even asking for. And then 3 days later, I woke up and I asked myself what I could do for myself that day that was positive, and I heard a voice when I asked. And, the voice comes still when I ask. I don't get intruded upon with this work. I don't trust people that said my guides are telling me to tell everybody so-and-so. I go, wait a minute, my guides aren't quite that bossy.
Mm.
They respect free will. I often say they'd let me walk into traffic, but if I ask, is this a good time to cross the street? They're more than happy to say not wise. And when they say not wise, that means I still have choice, but they wouldn't recommend it. You understand? So my experience of source or whatever it is, however limited, and you may have a far more advanced spiritual life than I ever will. I just have this odd ability. It's like being able to touch your nose to your tongue. Some people can do it. Some people can cross their eyes. Some people, whatever. This is how I'm built, for this kind of work, it seems, and I show up for it. But my understanding of God is only as good as my experience of it. I don't know, I don't even know if you can take it into the next day, except the memory or the idea of it. So is your wife right? Probably, is God all things? I mean, the guides I work with, you know, talk about, God as the body, God as the tree, God as the sky, the source of all things. They say there's one note being played in the universe, one tone that is in manifestation as all things. Everything seen is an articulation of that sound, which they call the word, you know. which is, again, it's a biblical thing, but I think they're speaking in metaphor, that there is the action of the divine, which plays out as all manifestation. I suppose that means all gods too. I don't know.
hmm When I came out of, I think I had, it was like a DMT trip at one time, and the word, it stood out to me, and that one song,
Mhm.
that sort of idea or notion really stood out to me as well. Um, I experiment with psychedelics. Have you had any experiences with psychedelics at all?
When I was in high school and the crappy stuff, when I was, trying to be a garbage head, but no. And it's really because I quit doing everything when I was 25.
Mm,
And it's not that I put plant medicine in the same category as recreational drugs. I certainly don't. But for me, it's a door that I kept closed. And one day I may choose to explore that again, but I haven't. And part of the reason I haven't is I sort of don't know how I'm wired to do what I do. I mean, it took a long time to get my system developed to the level that it seems to be, where I can just close my eyes and dictate a book.
hmm
But, so I'm conscious. When I ask my guidance about it, I basically hear not wise. But that's for me, not wise for my system, or perhaps my history of, addiction or whatever,
hmm
but that's for me. So I have no opposition to it, except, I get concerned sometimes that people are trying to have great big experiences and not quite knowing how to integrate them. And I think the integration is as important as anything else
hmm Yeah,
as a
yeah,
spiritual experience.
yeah. Integration is really key in the whole process, and I find that some people. I mean, I know quite a few people just like that. Yeah, especially before all the COVID stuff happened, they were going away and doing the ayahuasca, doing the ceremonies, coming back, but not really applying much of what they learned from that experience, and then just going back and doing the whole same thing. And it almost became like a cycle, the whole process. Um, but anyways, I wanted to ask you as well, the three books you have coming up. So you mentioned that there was no real plan for that. When were you sort of given, I guess, the instruction that there would be three books coming up outside of that one we discussed, the Kingdom?
During the last book, during the last book, they said that there would be more.
Was that Alchemy then? Last book?
No, the last book is the one that's not out yet. So it was
Oh, okay, okay, Kingdom. Okay.
during the dictation of the kingdom, they started saying, we'll discuss this in future books. And then I went, okay, there's more books. And I was glad there were more books. For me, it's sort of laid out the next few years for me, like, okay, there are going to be these things, which means I'm going to have to keep working and showing up. And that gives me a little bit of structure. I had a life for many, many years where I set my body clock by the academic calendar, when Christmas break was, when summer break was, all those things. And I'm grateful for the discipline that this work brings to me. It's one of the areas of my, the few areas of my life where I'm very disciplined, is as I show up for this stuff. I'm also really curious as to what they have to say. And I don't know if there comes a day when they say, thank you, that's all, see you later, next lifetime. And I go, okay, well, that was
Yeah.
that. Um, but it hasn't happened yet. And I enjoy the channeling still. I'm fascinated by it. And I think it's because I don't really understand it, and I'm curious. I want to know where it goes and how it ends. That's all.
hmm And now you are a medium for a lot of people. Have you ever had someone be a medium for you, or perform a reading on you?
Oh yeah, I love it.
Okay.
Oh
What
yeah.
was the last interesting like takeaway from your last reading?
My last interesting one. Oh my goodness. Well, that was this morning. I trade with somebody and I love her dearly. My friend Laura Day. And, she was reading me the Riot Act, basically, about how I'm still not willing to be fearless in my life in ways that I can and am capable of. Um, I had a friend who passed away in October, Jeanette Meek, who was a mentor for me for years. We spoke almost every night online for many, many years. She was an elderly lady, and she was a good old-fashioned, old-time medium, blue-collar gal from East Providence, Rhode Island. And she had the biggest heart I've ever known on anybody. And you know, I've benefited greatly from people. And some of the best mediums, truthfully, are not known. You know, they're not celebrity mediums. They're
Hmm.
did people. I have a friend who I think is terrific, who works in a law firm. He used to do readings professionally. He doesn't want to anymore. He wants his pension. I go, fine, that's fine. You can have it. So, you know, I have a certain skill set. Most psychics that I know don't read well for themselves. And we don't read well for ourselves because we have an emotional investment in the outcome. So God forbid I like somebody or I've got a thing for somebody and I'm going, is it going to work out? I'm not the best person to read on that because I have an investment in the outcome. The guides I work with once in a while, I mean, they're very good with me in the moment because they're very big on me not taking actions in fear. So I get a lot of counsel for the moment. But once in a while, they'll say something to me like, by the way, you're getting a TV thing next tomorrow. And then I'll get the email. I'll go, oh, that was fun. They gave, but you know, they didn't give me, and if they'd given me 3 days before, I would have obsessed about it, you know, or worried it away. So, you know, that's sort of the equivalent of what I can do. But I'm very good with other people. You see, if you ask me about your marriage, I'm completely neutral to that outcome. So I can tune into you, I can tune into your spouse, I can feel the dynamic. And that's a lot of the work I do with people. You know, if you think of me as the switchboard, you know, I'm tuning into your higher selves and your personality selves and what you're not saying that you need to say. And you know, going back and forth between the two, it's just like switching the radio stations. And I find that really interesting. And I find it interesting because it's a lot of this stuff is provable. You know, it's not like I'm trying to get your you know, dead Aunt Mary, you know. You know, if I'm tuning into your wife's boss, you know, and I'm tuning into the dynamic of her job and how that's affecting marriage, you know, that stuff can be, you can go check. And I like that. It helps me to trust the channeled stuff that comes through as well. So yes, I get readings.
Hmm. Yeah, I was just wondering, and you know, if it's weird for you, just but it seems like you get them pretty often, and I suppose just because you would know a lot of people that are in that space, and they just naturally inclined to even. I'd imagine that even if they're speaking to you, they'd be like, "Paul, something coming through right now, and I need to tell you about this," or whatever it may be. Does that ever happen?
No, I mean, honestly, I have some friends that work that way.
Okay.
I've learned over the years, and this is for me, that if I get something for you, it's not necessarily my place to tell you. You know
Okay.
what I mean? It's not none of my business. So, you know, when I was newer at this and younger with this, and I wanted validation from other people, and I wanted them to think I was special and all that stuff that fortunately you kind of outgrow, that was more important. If I have a friend that I read for on a regular basis, I will do that. But mostly I'm just reading for my clients. It doesn't occur to me. It wouldn't occur to me to tune into you unless you ask. It wouldn't tune in, or any of my friends, you know. But if they say, hey, Paul, can you look at this? I've got a job interview. Or hey, Paul, can you look at this? I'm really confused about this relationship. I can go there. And I'm happy to. The only time I tune into my friends, I just said this to someone the other day, is like if I'm getting stood up at a restaurant or something, I want to know if I'm getting stood up or if the person's stuck in traffic. So I'll tune into them and see what's really going on. But other than that, it's none of my business. You know?
Hmm. Does that have to do with impacting anyone's free will by any chance, like giving them certain information in that way?
You know, I've done it. I just said I've done it, and I've gotten called out on it. You know, like, Paul, I wish you hadn't told me that. I didn't ask. And I was like, whoa, you know, and this was in my younger days when I was opening up and I was excited. I once had somebody who was a very good medium. I was in the bathroom. I get this text. And I was on tour, you know, and it said, who's the blonde guy? Who's the blonde sociopath with the beard? Be careful. And I went, oh my God, next 2 years, I didn't talk to any blondes, you know, no bearded
Uh-huh.
blondes. I didn't want to know, you
Yeah.
know. So that didn't help me at all. That was just, you know, that's how I do my work. Other people are very different and everybody's got their own style. I try not to offer unless asked. That's how I work. I don't mind tuning into anybody that somebody asks about. I'm working at a higher level. I'm not, overriding anybody. I'm just tuning into the aspect of them that is present and can be heard. But, I wouldn't go there if I wasn't being asked to.
Mm. And do you find it's easier for you to do it in person with someone or digitally online, like on Zoom or Skype or anything?
You know, I miss having an office. I had an office in New York City, and I missed seeing people, face to face. But only that's because so much of my work is on the phone, and now all of it's on the phone and on Skype and Zoom and all that stuff. And it doesn't make a difference. I actually find that sometimes back in the days when I used to read for people and I would just see their screen name, that was really interesting because I had no information. I didn't know the gender and we typing stuff to each other. I found it a really clean way to work. I mean, I made errors too. I remember once reading for this very beautiful, beautiful woman, and I knew she was dating a friend of mine who referred her, another client, who dated supermodels and stuff. So I figured, okay, she must be a supermodel. And this woman had this beautiful long neck. And during the reading, I kept seeing Audrey Hepburn, the actress in her older years, feeding starving children in Africa, which is what she did. She was a philanthropist and she worked for organizations. But I just had decided that this woman must be a model. And at the end of the session, I said, by the way, what do you do for a living? She said, oh, I feed starving children. I said, okay, great. They
Yeah.
weren't really telling me what it was, but my visual interpretation
Uh-huh.
was telling me what I should think.
Uh-huh.
Nothing to do with the truth. So I learned that visual stuff can be misleading. So I try not to take the cues there at all if I can help it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. They used to do it just with usernames, like yeah, no information whatsoever, just the most random username that someone would have and
Yeah.
being able to tune in.
When I was first teaching myself to read, yeah, that was one of the ways I worked.
Uh-huh. And how many years ago was that?
That period probably was the psychic. That was when I was channeling. I wasn't doing psychic at that point, maybe 15 years ago or
Okay.
something. There were other things that I knew I could do, but I hadn't worked. It's a long, long, long story that I'm going to spare you, but I wanted to find out if I could work with a group and work psychically. And one of the ways to try that was to create a space online where I would really get trained. And I did. I did it for a little while. And it gave me a whole bunch of confidence because I was accurate and that was what was helpful.
Huh. Well, really interesting stuff. I'm totally fascinated by it. Thank you for taking this time for having this conversation. I really do appreciate it, and I'll be sure to put all your information, all the new books and everything as they come out, all up to the description of this episode. If people do want to reach out to you to, book a one-on-one or a reading or anything like that, how would you do so? What's the best way?
It's through my website, which is just paulselig.com. That's how, people can find me.
And is it something you're doing now? Like,
So I still do privates. I do them, but it's usually it's a big wait. We just open up, sessions periodically. A lot of what I do are the live streams and the intensive workshops, which are channeled. We do about one of those a month, a 5-day workshop every month.
Okay, that's what I was wondering too. So that's where someone can join a group and then you're doing like a group Zoom. Is that how it works?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the guides are teaching and they're teaching online. It's their
Mm.
workshop. I just know the title. They take questions there too, or I will do some of the psychic work there too. So it's a way to ask questions of me or the guides, in that context. And I do pretty much every Wednesday night, I'm lecturing and taking questions as well. But all that information's up on the website.
Okay. Now, I just want one last question. When you're doing all this, do you find that, I know you mentioned earlier when you were asking the guys some questions, I mean, do you find that energetic, it can drain you if you're doing a lot of readings and a lot of that work all day long? Like, you get a lot of R&R time for yourself outside of that?
I'm working a lot now. I, for me to do 4 readings a day, I'm pretty toasted afterwards. And that's about what I've been doing a day. But, I also just got a house and I'm, there's construction going on. So I'm just in massive confusion all over the place. So who knows?
Uh-huh.
I'm tired right now. But yeah, it takes its toll. But, I'm living in a beautiful place in a beautiful part of the country.
I know that is a beautiful place. That is a very beautiful place. Well, congratulations on that as well, because I know it was unexpected, but it seems like it's meant to be, and you're loving it. And I mean, that's really great to see. I actually, a mentor of mine, Ram Dass, um, was in Hawaii as well. So,
Oh,
um,
I'm 5 minutes away or so from.
oh wow, yeah, beautiful. I'm actually working with them now, Love Server Member Foundation, as an ambassador to help, like, whole community and everything. So,
It's great. I'm doing a benefit for Hanuman Maui,
oh, cool.
which is in March, and that's actually up on my website too.
Oh, nice, very nice.
So
Okay, perfect.
they were trying to raise money for the Satsang there.
Wow. Okay. Didn't know that. I'll be sure to try and help out as well, and I'll grab all those links and everything. Well, thank you again for having this conversation. I love that we, can touch base every once in a while, and it's really great, especially after I listen to you in the audiobook, and then, to catch up like this is really wonderful. I do appreciate it. Thank you again, and we'll talk soon.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.